Roger, I wonder, could you put up that slide of the butterfly? Because when I think of, first of all, I'm Rodney Peterson, Executive Director of Cooperative Metropolitan Ministries, the oldest Boston-based interfaith social justice network. And when I think of, if you can get it there, I want the butterfly. Because Roger, when I think about you, I think of caterpillars. What I mean by that, if you can get the picture of, what I mean by that is I knew Roger when he was a political scientist. And then he changed hats to be an environmental philosopher. And the best move you've ever made in life. For a number of years I worked with the World Council of Churches and was involved in dialogue between science and religion. And we never got it right because we never got a philosophy or morality. Morality is the catchment for law. And your book has done a marvelous job in creating a moral patina, a moral picture, framework within which the law operates. So Roger, I'm not going to say anything more about you. I'm going to let you say everything you can about yourself and just call you a butterfly, no longer a caterpillar.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for those kind words, and thanks, of course, to MIPL and Cooperative Metropolitan Ministry for sponsoring this evening. Let's begin just by very gently sitting up in our chairs, letting our eyes gently close, and with a gentle and relaxed attention to the breath, keeping in mind that we can't breathe in the future or the present, we can only breathe now, and that each breath is our connection to life. No breath, no connection, no life. And gently and easily bring into your mind an image of some living being for which you care. A parent, a child, a spouse, a tree, a dolphin, a butterfly, a seagull. And gently open your eyes. And I will talk for about half an hour, and that'll be about 15 minutes for discussion. If you get bored or tired, just close your eyes and go back to that image, because that's all I'm talking about. But of course, being a philosopher and being Jewish, I'm going to go on and say other things. So Vince very correctly, in my mind, pointed out the moral core of the problem. But what is it to be moral in the face of this crisis? And by crisis, I certainly mean the climate crisis, but not just the climate crisis. We are in the midst of a full-blown environmental crisis, such that, as came out a little while ago, 3 billion fewer birds just in the United States and Canada. Have you noticed? Mass die-offs of insects. Have you noticed how many fewer insects there were this past summer? The snow on top of Mount Everest, too polluted to drink if you boiled it down to water. Top of Mount Everest. There are, estimates the UN, several million climate refugees every single year. And there have been for at least a decade. So we're in the midst of this shocking, striking, threatening environmental crisis. What is moral life like here? How did we get here? Well, the first thing I want to say is we got here because all the major features of our civilization didn't recognize it. You can go down the line from religion to philosophy, to the rise of science, to the advent of capitalism, to our concept of rationality, to our political structures, to our consumerism. All these features didn't see what was going on until very, very recently. And while some people have claimed that they've seen it, and other people have claimed to be doing something about it, for the most part, the dominant institutions of our society have not. Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light is great, but it doesn't yet stand up to Exxon. But it's not just these externalized, identified elements of our culture, the big institutions, the big money, the famous traditions. It's us as well. So what I'm going to do is talk and read, because after all, I put it on paper, so what the hell? Who are we if we are not an expression of our culture, cogs in whatever economic regime is dominant, willing, or at least not violently rebellious, subjects of our current political system? We emerge into a world of language, family structure, gender relations, technological development, scientific knowledge, and legal forms. Our vaunted individuality is typically defined by which brands we buy, which among a limited set of consumerist lifestyle options we choose, who we sleep with, or which among a series of political, religious, or spiritual viewpoints we adopt, all of which are likely to be more or less compatible with the current environmental system. As we pay taxes, obey the law, find a place to live, and use common means of transportation, for the most part, a car. How did we all get here this evening? We fit into systems that are structured by social forces and traditions that existed before we did, and shape our sense of the world. To understand life, we will use some combination of inherited popular culture, religion, philosophy, and political ideologies. But if religious traditions and philosophy, common sense and popular culture, economics and politics, rationality and science have all been contributors to the economic crisis and are at best being reformed into inadequate responses to it, and these are the influences that have created us, how can we trust ourselves to do the right thing? Reminded of an image of a boat on which you're sailing too far to take it back to land. It springs a leak. The radio goes out. What are you going to do? You can't go back to land. It's too far. You have to repair it as you're sailing on it. That's our culture. That's our technology. That's our religious traditions. That's our political systems. Everything. There are at least 5 ways in which we have been internally structured to live lives that are compatible with a destructive environmental regime. The first one is the emotional dependence on work. How is it, you ask yourself, that some highly trained people can get up in the morning and go to work, and what their job is to create an automobile so technologically sophisticated that when it's tested for its emissions, it looks very clean. And when you drive it, it puts out 5 times as much emissions. Now that was VW did that. You think, who could do that? Do they want to pollute other people? How can you get up in the morning and lobby for fracking or lobby for formaldehyde? How can you do such a thing? And the answer is simply, and for the short version, is that in the absence of community, of tradition, of culture, of a sense of place, how do we get a sense of who we are? By how we work. So in order to maintain their identity as people who work, just like some of the people who executed the Holocaust, people will do anything. Their moral vision contracts, their emotional tie to work is retained. How else do we internalize this? Well, we're used to the ease, to the comfort. I drive my car, and I have 183 satellite radio stations, and I can put 500 CDs on something this size and stick it in the corner. If I want to change the heat in my house, I have to move a dial 1/4 of an inch. And on and on and on. Some of it's wonderful. My younger daughter is highly disabled. She has 2 titanium rods supporting her spine. Without those, she'd have died 20 years ago. All these toys, these necessities, these fundamental things of our life depend on a chemical, technical, industrial energy system that's wreaking havoc. That's giving us 3 billion fewer birds. We are alienated from the nature we wish to save. How many of us, including me, could name 20 plants that grow within a mile of my house? How many people know which birds are supposed to come back when? Or how many fewer birds than there were 5 years ago, or which bodies of water are safe to drink, or safe to bathe in, or swim in, and which are too polluted. How many of us know what the phase of the moon is? We don't know. We're separated. We do have nice nature screensavers and pictures and nature specials. They're lovely. But is it, I ask myself, enough? And I say, no, it isn't. And our lives are colored by systematic forms of technology which we simply, for the most part, maybe everybody in this room does, and that's great, don't understand. Consider, you have a hard day at work, or if you're a student in classes, you come home, make some dinner, maybe grab a beer, time for a little rest. So you grab the remote and flick on the TV. Sound familiar? Anybody ever do that? No, you're too good. Okay. But you can't. You don't do that. You can't. You cannot turn on the TV because it's on already. If it weren't on, it would not respond to the remote. It must be on to be drawing power from the grid, to be ready for your command from the couch. Just being plugged in makes it on. This fact is significant because televisions, computers, rechargers plugged into sockets when they're not recharging anything, audio equipment, microwaves, DVD players, garage door openers, these and many other common home appliances draw what some call phantom or standby power. Look around your house, see how many you have. And while each particular appliance may use a vanishingly small amount, all the appliances together use an amount that is far from small. It is in fact between 5 and 10% of home energy consumption in the United States and in other developed nations. The amount equal, I believe it was, what was it, Greece and Vietnam together. All their energy is equal to the amount of all this crap we have plugged in all the time. Now, when such things were invented, were they ever brought to our attention? Were you instructed in this when you bought the appliance? Or did it ever put to some kind of democratic vote? Not that I noticed. Not that I noticed. Transition. What can we do? What changes can we envision? Let's think about democracy. Start off with the concept of democracy, and what do you get? One person, one vote. But one person, one vote is essentially a bunch of atoms moving separate from each other into a darkened voting booth. Yes, it's better than not having any voting, but there's very little deliberation, very little of what's called, in my trade, I'm a philosopher, that's how I learned it, a communitarian approach. So along comes the idea that what we want for democracy is not just a lot of isolated people voting, but people in communities discussing things. What Extinction Rebellion, this new organization that's doing fabulous civil disobedience all over the world, calls community citizens councils, and that's the term. So that you talk, so that you listen, you find out what's on his mind, her mind, their mind, what's bothering people, what are their arguments. Turn this a little more. Not just democracy should be conversations, back and forth, back and forth. But conversations include not just articulated, rational, male-style reasoning, but an expression of emotion. Right? If somebody starts to cry, that tells us something. Or somebody says, you know, my parents were survivors of the Holocaust, so when I see the government turning towards fascism, I get terrified. The sense of personal story, this expression of emotion, tells us something. It communicates to us. Now, if democracy can include these kinds of communication, why does it have to stop at the species level? Why can't we take the rash of birth abnormalities in polluted frogs, or the crack as a huge quantity of a glacier breaks off into the ocean, or the last call of the last wolf? Why can't we take that as part of what I call an ecological democracy? We already have legal structures in which people who cannot talk in a language have their interests represented. Infants, people who have Alzheimer's, people who have various kinds of disability, their interests are represented. Why can't we represent the legitimate interests of nature? The great philosopher, American philosopher John Rawls said, if you want to understand what justice is, Put yourself behind a veil of ignorance, which is to say, imagine you didn't know what gender you were, what race you were, what social class, what ethnicity, what nationality. You didn't know any of those things. What kind of society would you like to live in? That's why I say let's turn that one step further and ask ourselves, suppose you didn't know what species you were. What would a just society look like? What does this look like, communicating with nature? You get up in the morning, see your parents or children or roommates. How are you, you might ask? You might notice them smiling or frowning, high energy or fighting through a hangover. If your neighbor of many years doesn't sit on her front porch anymore, if the people you regularly communicate with through tweets or Facebook posts or email or even a monthly phone call, these people don't email, call, or tweet, you sense a possible problem. You reach out. You care. If you read of communities devastated by hurricanes, you might send a contribution or even organize supplies to be sent. You probably like it when Riff the dog or Fluffy the cat greets you with the customary nit, tail wag, or purr. And if they lie in a corner, head on their paws, and barely look up when you arrive, you know that something isn't right. This last sense of communication is not in language. It is available to anyone of any race or gender, nationality or religion at virtually any historical period. Notice what it takes to connect with Riff and Fluffy. Attention to the details of the body, empathy with subtle emotional cues, the drooping tail, the lack of expression in the eyes, and an imaginative extension of ourselves into their experience. But this experience, and here's perhaps the key point, resides in something within ourselves that is not tied to social identity or complicated self-description. We cannot do this as lawyers or plumbers, Republicans or New Yorkers. It is not because we fervently believe in Christ or Marx, have parents who are successful brain surgeons, or children who've gotten into Stanford, or prefer Apple to PC, or rap to opera. Something else must come into play, or something other than all these things is at stake. The possibility of ecological democracy and of an adequate response to the environmental crisis at all depends on our capacity to realize this. The basis of our communion with nature is that we are beings that breathe and eat, sense the sun, feel the wind and rain, experience love, fear, and pleasure in our bodies, have an identity bounded by birth and death, and get to share this planet. So an ecological democracy suggests that we are all citizens of a common world and that we must engage as whites must listen to blacks, as men must listen to women, as members of a dominant race or ethnicity need to listen to the oppressed and the marginalized. So we all need to listen to nature. It's no surprise, it's no secret, it's a sad truth that we're all part of the problem. Abolitionists didn't own slaves. If you're a man who claims to be a feminist, you have to get up in the middle of the night to feed the baby, do your share of the housework, accept female authority, and interrupt sexist comments. If you do, you have the right to call yourself a feminist or a supporter of feminism or something like that. But I would imagine that very few people biked here, drove automobiles, and even the electric cars are responsible for emissions. A good deal of all of our foods came from thousands of miles away, on and on and on. I'm sure you all know this. So we are part of the problem, even though hopefully, God willing, we are part of the solution. So what does this look like? Well, let's think of two different people because it's not the same everywhere. Consider Diane, a secretary at a major energy company, who commutes to work in her aging gas guzzler, pays no attention to phantom power in her home, and eats lots of meat. She is certainly a contributor to environmental problems. As we look closer, we see that her salary is low, her rent is high, she's constantly pushed to work harder. On weekends and evenings, she frequently helps her aging parents with shopping, driving to appointments, and daily chores. When the doctor clears her throat and starts talking about treatments for breast cancer, Diane remembers how close she grew up to a plastics processing facility. We see that besides being a minuscule cause of the environmental crisis, she is also one of its victims. Now contrast Diane with Richard, the boss of Diane's boss's boss, a high-level executive. His job is to convince the public that fracking does not pollute groundwater, increase earthquakes, or cancel out its own climate advantages over coal and oil by the potent climate effects of the methane that escapes during routine extraction. Richard has the salary and probably the accumulated wealth and educational background to live an ecologically responsible life. He could pay for local organic food and drive an electric car. More important, his actual livelihood depends on his active defense of practices he knows are damaging. He's not simply consuming what's out there as Diane is, he is helping make sure that what's out there stays out there, and that if anything, there is more. So there's a spectrum. Some people have defined this as a spectrum of responsibility for all of us, but guilt concentrated. Of course, the spectrum is a gradual emerging process, emerging field of concern. Some people really are clearly mass murderers. Mass murderers. And they wear $5,000 suits, and they have 4 homes, and they have incomes, and they were born a day that I'll make them my whole life. 30 years, Exxon knew what was going on. We have the email and the documents to prove it. They were warning their own facilities, prepare for rising seas. And at the same time, they took money, millions of dollars, and hired a public relations firm to cast doubt on the reality of global warming, to cast disinformation. Which public relations firm was it? The same public relations firm that cast doubt on the relation between smoking and cancer. What I said, that people get up in the morning and do that? I don't think those public relations people said, I want people to die from global warming. No, it's a living, it's a job, it's a business card, it's an office, it's a salary, it makes me somebody. How do you know what to do and what not to do? How do we know what's going to be effective? Well, God knows, I wish I could answer that question. I know certainly in the 60s and 70s, I spent a lot of, sad to say, fruitless hours arguing with other people about what the best strategy was for the revolution. Sadly, most of the time when people do that, they look at past political movements, and they try to generalize from that, and they're applying it to current situations, and they have the things there. So we don't know what's going to work. And sometimes, I would suggest, we have to contract our vision so that we're not always wondering about what's going to work. We're asking ourselves, what's the right thing to do? If 10 million innocent people are being murdered, and I only killed 1, does the fact that my action is only the tiniest fraction of the slaughter give me license to pull the trigger? Does the wrongness of my action diminish because it is such a minuscule part of the totality of bad actions being committed? Surely this one person had a life that was meaningful to him. Probably yet family or friends would find the person's death a loss. And those with creativity, love, or just good humor this person could have brought into the world if they had not been murdered by me. Even if someone would take my place if I turned away, do I want to be a killer of an innocent person? Don't I have an obligation not to harm other people unjustly, even though so many other people are harmed? And they might very well be harmed in any case. We might say, an awful lot of people eat meat, waste water, and drive when they could walk. So it doesn't make any difference if I do. But would we ever say, an awful lot of people sexually abuse children, so it doesn't make any difference if I do? We would be horrified at the second, about children. Why not the first, which also, though over time and distance, creates vast unjust suffering? Consider, you've just finished your coffee on the way home from a late night of work. Your car is messy enough already. Why not just toss the cup out the window? Given the uncountably vast quantity of junk humans have spread around the planet, including the oceans and the surrounding atmosphere, there are more than 25,000 football or bigger sized pieces of junk that are marvelous space explorations just leave circulating here. So we're not content just to do the oceans, the air, and the land. You've got to put it up there. too, which is, sort of have to admire the consistency. In all this, what's one throwaway coffee cup? It is, after all, just one of something like 2.5 billion, with a B, such cups thrown away each year. If it is paper, it takes only 1/4 pound of CO2 to manufacture, an infinitesimal part of the approximately 3.3 billion tons of CO2 produced per year. Nevertheless, I can still ask myself, do I want to be part of this enormous waste? Am I really too tired, stressed, or preoccupied not to put the cup down, wait until I get home, toss it in the recycling bin? And because I stop at that coffee place several times a month, is it really not possible for me to stick a travel mug in my backpack and stop consuming or throwaway cups at all? And is it too much trouble to check to see if the coffee is organic, shade-grown, and fair trade? Now you might say with some legitimacy, I'm too tired, I've got to deal with my children, my parents, my work, my house. I've got all these different things going on. And look, you can only do what you can do, which is, after all, that's what's happening. But when somebody says, I can't do any more, that's a factual claim. Or at least it's a claim about a fact. Is it a true statement or not? Are you kidding yourself about how much you can do and can't do? You're kidding yourself about what's possible and not, which is one reason why moral life in the face of environmental crisis requires at least two things. One is a good deal of moral self-examination, and the other thing is moral communication with other people who can say, look, Roger, yeah, you could do it. You don't have to do that. Come on, stop kidding yourself. You could do blah, 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 blah. Because perfection is so hard to get to, but it's through self-examination and moral communication with people who know us that we can get towards something better. It's not too much fun. What can I as an individual do? Ever heard that one? A very good question. I've gotten it all the time. The answer is simple. As an individual, you can join with other individuals in a political movement. As an individual, you can join with other individuals in a political movement. Morally, we have to commit ourselves to less consumption, less meat, less junk, all that kind of stuff. And we have a moral obligation to change the fundamental structures of society. You wouldn't want to, a man should not want to be a rapist, so as an individual he should not rape, but it's also very important for him to support political organizations protecting and enhancing the rights and equality of women. The same thing goes for racial issues or ethnic issues, and certainly goes for human. The people who control society, and it ain't anybody in this room, I don't suspect, unless there are a couple of billionaires hidden in the corner dressing down to see what's going on. The people who control this society know who they are. They're very organized. They're in communication with each other. There are a few of them who have something like an awareness of what's going on. There's some British hedge fund guy who gave half a million pounds or euros, whatever they're using him now, to Extinction Rebellion, which is lovely. And a number of big corporations have promised to cut down their carbon use, but not one of them has said, you know something, consumers, buy less shit. No. They don't say that. They don't say that. And everything that you buy is waste in one kind or another, uses energy. The stuff, especially all the high-tech stuff, is filled with toxic metals. They're very organized. There's only one thing that will impede them. And that's a mass political movement. What's the future going to look like? What's the future going to look like? The last chapter here is called Futures, but there's two I'm giving you, and I'm just going to read a brief excerpt from each one. It's in the short form of a short story. The first half of the story is about a young boy named Adam and his father. So it starts with Adam talking. I haven't been outside for days. I'm getting pretty hungry. But the wind just won't let up. Every time Grandpa shuffles up what's left of the stairs and pokes his head out, I can hear it, howling, whining, pulling at everything it touches, trying to get in here. So he just slams the hatch door shut, shakes his head, and reaches over to pat me on the shoulder. Soon, Adam, soon. Then we'll go out and see if the berries have ripened, and maybe some kind of fish is in the floodplain. I know it's hard here, but it could be worse. There are places where the wind is as bad that it just stopped raining. People are stuck inside without water when the blows come hard. He's right, I know. We have jugs and jars and old plastic containers full of water, and we sprout old seeds, the ones that aren't too moldy. And that's mainly what we eat when we can't go out. But I also see what he doesn't think I can see, that look in his eyes. It's pretty bad. Not as bad as the look I saw in a dog once that we caught and chased down because it lost a leg just before we killed it. We roasted it slow over a fire that last time the wind stopped for a whole week. Grandpa's eyes looked like that dog's, fighting until he couldn't go on anymore. But knowing it was hopeless. That's one future. And here's a child, first the grandmother named Amanda and her daughter named Eve. The change came when we realized that oil wasn't the enemy, wasn't evil, wasn't the source of some horrible poison that was destroying the earth by making the climate change. No, oil is sacred. It holds the life force of billions of living beings that can give us heat and movement and so much else. The problem wasn't the oil, it was us. Treating oil like some cheap throwaway junk, wasting it, my God, how we wasted it. And if the life force bound up in it had no meaning. And that was true of everything else, food and water, even air, that we polluted as if there was an infinite supply, when really there's just this thin shell around the earth. The rest of the universe probably doesn't have a single molecule. We finally figured out, or was it that we finally remembered, how we should treat water, food, sources of energy like oil and wood, old people who need company more than a lot of medicines, kids who need love and attention. We learned that the sacred is not some God in heaven, some afterlife, or some words in a book. It's the living beings and the sources of life, that's all, and that's enough. And then her granddaughter, Eve. I'm really glad I'm alive. Each morning I get up and say my prayers to life, and I mean them, so where would we be without life? But Amanda tells me that life means death, just like death brings life. That we come in one form for a while, then become something else. I hope I become a butterfly or a cardinal. I look at coral this spring. Of course I know it won't be me when I'm something else. I'll just be something else. But in a way I'll still be me. Not the me that says words and walks on 2 feet and wears clothes, but the me that breathes and has a body and lives on the earth. That's enough, I think. Thank you.
Time permits 2 or 3 questions.
Is reaching out to young people who are so worried. And I think that my focus has been like giving them concrete solutions, like passive house construction, embodied carbon, transportation options, not even just EVs, but what we need to do. So I feel like our generation focus needs to be to help the schools to educate the kids on these kinds of relying on the technology in a way, solar, wind, to give them a feeling of hope. And I'm just wondering if your book, touches on that at all, those kinds of things.
There's a chapter on despair, because I was the last person to say that despair is, at least to some extent, warranted, though in some ways it isn't. So I'll say 2 things about despair. One is, the problem with despair is that it presumes to know what's going to happen, and we don't. It could be much worse than we envisage. We might step back from the brink and save something. Well, no, we don't. However, let's take an analogy. Let's suppose, God forbid, and this is developed at some length in the book, God forbid your aging mother whom you dearly love is in the hospital. Things don't look good. The nurse comes and tells you, you better make plans. But we're not sure. Now at that point, would you spend all your emotional energy saying, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Well, I don't know what's going to happen. How can I make change? Is that what you want to do? I don't think so. I think you would go to your mother in the hospital, you'd spend as much time with her as you could, you'd hold her hand, you'd brush her hair, you'd sing to her, you'd talk to her, you would express love. Now to do that, you'd have to have courage to deal with the fear and the grief that's mounting up because it's your mother who you love. So my task, as a philosopher, as someone who communicates on these issues, is not to give people hope, but to try to arouse a sense of courage. Since we're in a temple, I'll mention that one of the inspirations I've had along this way is many, many years ago, I did a great deal of study of Jewish resistance during the Holocaust. I co-wrote an evening presentation on it, I wrote some philosophical papers on it. And if you read material from resistors during the Holocaust, you see people who had no hope. They knew they were going to die. Set up in the ghetto, they set up a resistance cell, and say, well, we could fight here against the Nazis who occupied the town. We know that the forest and starve, we'll probably get killed there. And still, what did they say? We will fight back. We will show the world that there is a spirit of resistance in the Jewish people, and in the future, some Jews will be heartened and kept from depression by knowing that some people fought back. Our task now is to resist, not with hope and not with despair, but with courage.
Roger, thank you.